All right, Angela, thank you for that. Good evening, or to say good afternoon, because it's still early. It's not quite 5 o'clock yet. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Webster. I am the founder and resident for the OnRamp program here at Venture Cafe at the Science Center. And I'll be acting as your host and tour guide over the next 8 weeks as we look to navigate you through this dynamic program we put together called OnRamp that is really geared towards preparing you to be successful as a startup in terms of your entrepreneurship journey. Tonight, we have a very exciting facilitator that I'll present to you very shortly, Rick Genzer from Ben Franklin. But if you missed last week's kickoff event, you missed a very dynamic session where we had the opportunity to really hear from, 3 different type of startup leaders who represent different areas of the sector in terms of their own individual journey. Tonight is the first of our workshops, which are really geared towards over the next 8 weeks that are going to be designed to give you some real valuable information that we think is going to be important to you, no matter where you are on your startup journey. As Angela pointed out, there's a few housekeeping rules programmatically. I want to review with you tonight and go over just so that we know that even though last week's event started at 5, our weekly sessions over the next 8 weeks are going to start at 4:30. And you'll be getting weekly notifications primarily from Angela, letting you know when the next workshop is going to be, which is going to be Thursdays at 4:30, but also to the topic for that week and background information on our facilitator. In addition to that, in terms of getting ready for the pitch competition, how we will wrap up the 8 weeks, which will be an additional week beyond the 8 weeks, to be able to be eligible for the pitch, and where the winner of the pitch competition will receive $5,000. You will have to have had attended at least 6 workshops. So 6 out of the 8 workshops require your attendance to be eligible for the pitch competition. That's going to be the first criterion for selection. We'll be getting back to you once we figure out what the rest of them are going to be. Third thing is that following our weekly sessions, we're going to go right into the Startup Roundtable, which has been an ongoing Venture Cafe activity, which is hosted by Aaron Sarasta and Eamon Gallagher. And those are 2 very important activities for you to consider attending. It's not a requirement for OnRamp, but it's highly suggested, because what they talk about is the accelerators the science centers currently operate, and also to what's required to be able to apply to those accelerators and come into them and be successful. They are a wealth of information. They've been leading the commercialization at the Science Center now for some years, and their track record in terms of producing successful startups speaks for themselves. I mean, that's in that session, which we call the Startup Roundtable, follows the OnRamp workshop immediately following. So without any further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce a dynamic man who is considered a startup leader in the Philadelphia entrepreneurship community. He's from Ben Franklin Technology Partners, which is one of the lead investment groups and funders for technology startups in the region. Ben Franklin has been around for some 24 years, Rick. Oh, it's been around a while. 35 years. And 35 years they've been supporting, building, and launching company. Rick is one of the lead advisors there, and is very involved and active in the startup community and has a wealth of information to share. Before I allow Rick to start, each week also too, I will be taking a poll. And the reason we're taking the poll is to really collect additional data, not on just the program that we're offering, but getting a sense of how you as founders and as entrepreneurs operating in this region feel about what else can be done to build and strengthen Philadelphia's startup ecosystem. So tonight's poll question, Angela, is what? Okay.
Can you see it?
Yep. True or false? This region has a common destination, in your opinion, for startups to go to and connect for support. True or false question, this region has a common destination for startups to go and connect for support. So we're just asking you to complete that before the end of this session. This data is going to be helpful as we look to build Philadelphia startup community to be more effective for you as you start your journey. Okay, with no further ado, Rick, my friend, the show is yours.
Oh boy. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you for your attention. So this is the first bit of content I've actually delivered via Zoom. I do a fair bit of content delivery, but this is the first time over Zoom. So we're going to be in this. We're going to be in this together. I thought I would do two things to begin this before I actually start talking about the subject matter at hand. The first is I'd like to give just a real brief background on Ben Franklin. I think that Tom did a great job, but I want to make sure that it's in context to the conversation. So Ben Franklin is in economic development. We're a not-for-profit that works very much like a VC. But I like to say we're a kindler, gentler VC, meaning we're not profit focused. We are in economic development, and mainly we're trying to fund startups in order for them to create good jobs. So it's truly economic development. But it is not charity in that it's like with art. You can say as an artist, hey, I only do art. I don't like the business part. And the answer is, well, if you don't make any money, it's very hard to continue doing your art. And I think that's the same is true in Ben Franklin, in that when we make investments, we still want to make good investments, right? It's just that we don't make investments exclusively for financial gain. We do them for economic development. We've been around, as I said, about 35 years. We've made 2,000 investments in the last 20 years. We have 225 active portfolio companies. I personally have a little over 40 that are in my portfolio. And so we're in the business of finding good companies, vetting those companies to decide to make an investment, and then managing the companies that we do have an investment in. And that's what I do all day, every day. In my side world, I help out in economic development, and this is one of those things, right? I'm really, really happy to be here. I really hope that I can deliver some good information for you as you begin your journeys into being an entrepreneur. So that is my ultimate goal in doing this, and that's the exclusive reason, other than the charm of Tom, of course, who's a great individual. He says, would you mind doing this? And I'm saying, well, of course not. Okay. The next thing I want to say about this before I go into the next bit of content is I really like interactivity. I don't particularly love listening to myself talk. So we're going to try, when I do this in 3 dimensions, I will pause quite a bit and I'll want people to chime in. Now, in the Zoom world, most people prefer to be muted because they can be noisy and disruptive. So maybe you'll be muted. But if you really want to chime in, unmute yourself, interrupt me, or put something in the chat, which I do have it up here on the screen, and Angela will be helping me as well. So I'm going to try to make this as interactive as possible, and we're just going to figure it out together. Good so far? Thumbs up for that? Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about me for a second. But the reason why I'm going to talk about me is because I think it provides a foundation. Thank you, Amelia, for the virtual thumbs up. What I'm going to try to do is talk a little bit about me, because I think it matters in this context, because we're talking about the ideation, the beginning step of starting a business. So I'm going to talk about me, not in facts and figures. I'm going to talk about me as the person. So personally, my goal is to be myself 100% of the time. That may sound weird, but that really is my goal. My goal is to be myself 100% of the time. And I actually try very hard to do this. I am not a chameleon. You're getting who I am right now. I will reveal of myself as best as I can, because I think being authentic is really important. At least it's important to me. And on the professional side, all I really want to be is a contributor. Now, I used to want to be king. I used to want to be right. I used to want to be smart. And I realized that none of those things are true. So now I just want to be a contributor, and I want to contribute as best I can. So this is one of those areas where I want to be a contributor. And so one of the concepts here is that I'm a member of the Philadelphia business community. And because I'm a member of that community, I have an obligation to the community to be a contributor there, or else I'm not in the community. And so I see this as not just my job, meaning economic development, but I see this as I'm either disqualified if I don't participate, or I'm in the community if I do. And I want to be in the community. So that's why I'm here tonight. Does it make any sense? Again, chime in if you want me to say more or less. I think my professional skills are really about two things. I'm a translator, and I possess a reasonably large amount of empathy. And I think they're interrelated. But the main skill that I bring is translation, in that I'm a pretty quick study and I understand this silo and I can then explain it to this silo. So that's one of the things I'm going to do for you today, right? I understand entrepreneurialism because I've done it. I have 2x4 scars. I've done this for years and years and years and years. By the way, I'm also an investor. It's another side. And with my understanding of those two areas, I hope to be able to explain some of that stuff to you, meaning I'm a translator. The gift that I was given, my father, who's downstairs right now, he was the most gifted educator I know. And so one of the things that I learned when I was a kid is how to communicate well. Maybe I'm not great at it, but I work really hard at it. And that's what I try to do with my world. I translate and I think about other people. The last thing I'll say is that I'm a substance over superficiality person. I'm all about relationships. I'm not high buy. I don't really have a ton of friends. That's not my gig. My gig is deep personal relationships. And so I hope at some point we all get to know one another. And I know you 5 years from now through your entrepreneurial journey, and you keep me abreast and we just keep talking. I'm really not interested in just, what's ever at the surface. I think that's a little, I don't know, I find it boring. What's fun to me is sitting one-on-one and debating something with somebody. Like, that is more fun than I can think of. So does anybody have any questions about that? Because otherwise I have a few things I want to talk about, unless you all take me in a different direction. Quiet. Okay. So it really is an honor to be kind of the first content here in your journey. So I want you to know that I think of it as an honor, and I'm gonna try my best to launch this, right? To get this OnRamp program moving in a direction that makes sense. But let's be clear, we are at the top of the funnel, right? If you want to start a business, this is that beginning stage. This is the ideation stage. This is a who you are stage. And that's what I'm going to talk about tonight, right? We're at the top of the funnel. Now, maybe, and I'm going to ask this question right now, maybe you guys have an idea about a business you want to start. So I'm going to pause here and say, do people generally have an idea of the business that they want to start? Or are they even further up and saying, you know what, all I know is I want to get the heck out of a job and I want to start my own business? Which is it?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is all. My name is Janice. Well, you probably already know that.
Hello, Janice.
Hi. I know what I want to do. Okay. I always wanted to start my own business. I guess you could say I'm a seamstress by trade. And what I've already started doing is putting my business out there. I do have a few customers, and probably would be more if it had not been for the pandemic.
Gotcha.
So I pretty much know what my goal is. but I would like to learn more of the steps that I need to take in order to really put it out there to make it
Perfect.
really happen.
Okay, and I'm seeing in the chat now that it does look like that people are mostly about, they know their business. So when I now talk about ideation, this helps me, right? So when I talk about ideation, right, I can now say it's the ideation of honing down what perhaps you want to do, as opposed to starting with, well, you know, maybe I want to be a rocket scientist and I want to invent rockets, or maybe I want to, you know, do something different. So that helps me. That helps me quite a bit. So I use hundreds of phrases in the world that I exist in, and the people who know me at the beginning, they'll roll their eyes when I keep using all these phrases, and then after a while, it kind of warms up. At least that's true of my significant others over the years. So I'm going to say the following one, which is you want to start with the end in mind. Start with the end in mind. That's the most important thing I can say to begin this session. That is to say, you want to ask yourself, what does success look like? What does success look like? Like that's, you really cannot start this journey. And believe me, I'm speaking of experience here. You need to start by thinking about what is success. So I'm gonna, what I'm gonna say is that I used to work with people whose success was defined by how much money was in their bank account. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Mm-hmm. But it didn't align with me. In other words, success for me has never been about how much money I have in my bank account. And so it might be for you, and that's not wrong. But I don't need you all to respond to this, but that's one of the first things that you should have in your head at the beginning of a journey like this. Like, what does this mean? For example, I have a friend back in Ballackinwood, great entrepreneur. He wants to employ a lot of people. That's what he wants to do. He likes employing people. He likes being a manager, and he doesn't need profitability. In fact, his business is not very profitable, right? But he has like 30 people that work for him in this business, and they're all making money. That makes him happy. And so that's the beginning of this sort of journey, as you start with the end in mind. Okay? These are questions somewhat rhetorical, meaning I want you to, or rather we want you to be thinking about, what does the end look like? What's the end game? Good so far? Good. I like that, Zave. Very good for you. So Antoinette talks about generational. I love that. The term that I often use for that is an annuity business, right? The kind of business that pays annuities over time. So those are good thoughts. Keep them coming. Okay. So I have some buckets of content that I want to deliver here. And those buckets of content will start here, which is, if you're going to start a business, you want to be thoughtful about the inputs to the business. So let's talk a little bit about inputs. So I gave you some thoughts, didn't I, at the beginning of the session? I told you a little bit about me. And the reason why I did that is I wanted you to understand a little bit about me. And in fact, those things about me are actually inputs to today's session. You also now want to think about the inputs that you have to the business you're thinking about creating or have created and want to do more with, right? So think about these things is what do you as the founding team bring to the endeavor? Like literally you could put these down on a piece of paper and say, these are the inputs to the business. So for example, suppose you come from a lot of money. One of the inputs might be money. That's not wrong. Doesn't make you better, doesn't make you worse. It just means that that's one of the things you bring to the table. Or conversely to that, you could come from a long line of a blue collar, middle class family, but you've always owned businesses. So, you know, a typical types of businesses might be tradespeople or small restaurants where you're not making tons and tons of money, but you understand the entrepreneurial mindset, right? Making payroll every week and the like, right? So the question here that you want to always be asking yourself is, what do you bring to the table? What resources are you bringing to the table? The next concept I'd like to talk about in this input area is a word that I call domain, or domain expertise, right? Domain expertise is different than skills. Skills are things like, I know how to do a balance sheet, or I know how to write in Microsoft's web environment. Those are skills. And I will argue, maybe you're going to disagree with me, I will argue that you can acquire skills. You personally can acquire skills, or you can buy skills on the market. But what you can't buy is domain expertise. You can't buy this, right? So I'm an entrepreneur. I have domain expertise. In fact, I've been an entrepreneur in the high-tech space, specifically IT. I have domain expertise, very, very hard to buy on the open market. If your family have been entrepreneurs for 2 generations, that's domain expertise, and that's a great input to your business. So I want you to make it differentiate you. If you're thinking about these assets, I want you to think about domain expertise. I think, did I forget her name all? Jacqueline, was it? Somebody talked about being in Seams.
Yes.
What was your name? Did I remember it right?
No, it's Janice.
Janice. Oh, I almost had it. You know, if for example, you know, having a skill might be, I know how to run a sewing machine, right? Mm-hmm. But if, for example, you've made 20 different kinds of clothing, then that puts you in a domain expertise. In other words, you understand clothing. That's domain. And that's really valuable. You can always hire somebody that knows how to cut a pattern. But to make a decision between like this season's fashion or something requires years and years and years of experience. And that's domain expertise. And that's the point I'm trying to make. Domain expertise means a lot when you're starting out a business. Pausing here. Yeah, how fabrics acts in humidity. There you go. I bake bread. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, you know, you too. Yeah, I mean, I bake bread. It's, yeah, okay, 65% hydration, sure, but things matter. And domain expertise gets you there. We as investors, we look for domain expertise because we know that it takes a long time and a lot of 2x4 scars to acquire. Shelley asks a great question, right? And I think the answer is, how do you accumulate it? I would argue that it's focus, right? You need to be focused on something. So for example, I told you I was an entrepreneur. I wasn't exclusively an entrepreneur in one industry or another one, right? But I had a focus on entrepreneurialism. Now, if you're just starting out and you don't really have any domain expertise, which may be the heart of this question, right? Is focus on what makes you unique. And that could be your domain expertise, right? What makes you unique? So for example, I was mentoring somebody, still do to this day, somebody that was born in China. And he come to the United States when he was 15 years old. And he possesses an understanding of multiculturalism more than I'll ever understand. Well, that's domain expertise, right? I can't acquire somebody who can translate multiculturalism well, but if he possesses it, it's an asset. I appreciate that question. Now, the next thing about assets I'd like to talk about is, oh, by the way, I'm going to pause here. This may be directly to you, Tom and Angela, but it's also to everybody. I only care about being valuable to you. I don't really care about what I'm talking about. Meaning, I mean, I care passionately about what I'm talking about, but I mean that I want to make sure that I'm providing value to you today. And so if we're veering off or we're not, hitting the right strides, just let me know. I'll pivot. Tom?
Rick, you're doing extremely well. And I think the responses we're just getting in the chat, is just validates that. So
It looks like people are engaged, yes.
people are very much engaged. So keep going.
Great. Let's keep going. But you'll see me do this from time to time. So again, I think there are many people who get up in situations like this and they really like the sound of their voice, and then they're boring as hell and they're of no value. Well, I'm uninterested in that. Going back to my community concept. So the last thing I want to talk about as an asset here, right, is, by the way, I got a beautiful smile from you, Joelle. Thank you.
I have a question for you, Rick.
Oh, let's go.
I think it'd be helpful to know from your experience, if you're utilizing the tips that you're giving, like what are the ways to go about that? So for example, if I'm trying to figure out my domain expertise, what are some steps that I can take to get there?
Interesting question. What are some steps you might take to get there? So the first thing, so I'm a big believer of brainstorming. I taught decision-making skills to prison inmates for 10 years. And part of the process was brainstorming, and I became pretty good at it. I believe in the concept of brainstorming. And the only thing you need to know about brainstorming is there's no wrong answer. So the first step I would take for you, Joelle, would be take a blank sheet of paper and brainstorm on it. Just vomit things on this paper until you get to the point where you can't think of any more. In other words, there's nothing wrong. And then work on that. The next thing I would do, which might surprise you, is interview 5 people who know you well and have them tell you. It's a scary thing. Believe me, it is. But you'd be surprised what they come up with. In fact, some people might shock you with how well they know you, and you never even thought about it. But it is a little scary, but it's part of the journey. Those are 2 techniques that you could use that might help you understand.
Hey, Rick, if I can jump in and just add some more insight to that. Another thing that you can do that I often encourage when I coach entrepreneurs is that if there are individuals that you think are doing what you would like to do or have experiences that you think you would like to be able to somehow emulate, reach out to them. Ask somebody to sit down and have a conversation with you about how they got there. I mean, it's commonly referred to as informational interviews, but one thing that I found in my experiences and starting a company, I started my first business 40 years ago, is that people like talking and don't mind sharing what they went through. And that's one of the reasons we've came up here at the Science Center with the whole idea of OnRamp, so that you can hear firsthand from people. But that's one part of it. The other thing that I've used very effectively to get involved in, to make connection with businesses and build my network is through volunteering. People underestimate the value and the impact you can have through volunteering. With one of the companies I was able to build and sell, my biggest client came from me volunteering with a youth program, and he just happened to be on the board. And we built a relationship, and from there I went to going into doing business with him. And so that right there opens doors, creates networks, allows you to establish relationships, and also too help you figure out also too how to build on your, as Rick put it, your domain expertise, just in terms of when you volunteer, you're giving of your time, and not getting anything in return. So it's about being involved with something that you're passionate about. And for me, it has always been youth. So that right there can lead you to understand, and strengthen your network, as well as you help identify your domain expertise.
I love what Tom just said, and I'm going to add to it by saying the following thing. So Tom had a passion about youth, which I endorse. I've been volunteering for 35 years, maybe longer than that. And the beautiful thing about volunteering is that you can also pick and choose. You can say, I don't know anything about veterinarian medicine or something. And I promise you that there's some veterinarian, someplace who will let you work there for free. And you'll learn a lot about that domain because you're just volunteering your time. So that's the cool thing about being community aware and plugging in this volunteering way. I'm pointing to Tom, even though you don't know I'm pointing to Tom. And it works really, really well. So thank you for that, Tom. There was a question earlier about what question you might ask.
Can I ask something about volunteering? I want to just add something.
Oh, yeah, Z.
There's so many worthwhile organizations out there that you can volunteer your time from. So I think it's important that you either pick one that's really close to your heart, but the other thing you can do is pick organizations where the people who you might be wanting to do business with are also going to be. And if you do that, if you can find an organization that's not, but both close to your heart in terms of your spirit, but also has people on the board or people who are part of that organization who could be future business partners or clients, then you've really struck gold.
So what do you do if you know what your domain expertise is? You know, like over the years, I've been, you know, it's been on many, many years that I've known what my domain expertise is. I've been using it, it's been using me. And, you know, then I began to work with people, began to make requests of me to utilize my domain expertise. But I have absolutely no knowledge of like running a business, creating a business. Yeah. And so it became this thing that, you know, I have this thing that people want, but how do I now escalate it and get it out there? And that's where I'm at.
Phrase number 2, no good deed ever goes unpunished. So Andrea, I love that question. And I believe that's really what the OnRamp program is about. So the idea here is that, yeah, maybe this discussion about domain expertise doesn't apply perfectly to you, but I'm going to now get into the next layer because I think it may be time to move off the subject anyhow. So you're kind of helping us segue to something else.
I actually have some, before you segue completely away.
Oh, sure.
I have a quick question that almost, how do you get over the imposter syndrome and you actually accept that you have domain expertise in something? Or how do you convince people that think it's a skill, but it's repackage it as domain expertise?
So first of all, I am not over my imposter syndrome. I cannot even believe that anybody would ask me to spend 90 minutes with you guys. I literally mean that. I am nobody as far as I'm concerned. I don't know anything. I feel like a pretender every day of my life. So I wish I could answer this question for you, but I will try in the following way, which is think about the transaction. Remember how I said start with the end in mind? And maybe Andrea, this is part of what this might help you, which is I personally am not transactional. I don't think of volunteering as transactional. I don't think of today's session as transactional. I think of it as relational because I don't really care about the transactions. But to your question, your name is only Hordes there. Is that
Ben?
Ben?
Yeah.
So if you could visualize, and Andrea, if you can visualize what a transaction might look like based on that domain expertise, that's what gets you there. So for example, I was a management consultant for 15 years. And the transaction that I used was, if I don't give you something that you can act on, I don't bill you. That's just the way I did it. That was my transaction. The transaction wasn't my time.
Oh, and I'm an accountant.
I don't think my time is valuable.
I'm an accountant. That's how I do it. I was just wondering if there was like other people might have the imposter syndrome.
I think when I admit, you know, some people think I'm, let's say, on the top of my game. Like I was, like Tom says that, you know, I'm somebody. I don't think that. But when they say that, I have to accept it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think that when I admit this to people, I think pretty much Most people think they're imposters.
Yeah.
At least that's been my experience, because I get out there and I say it all the time because I feel it.
Okay.
For time, I'd like to move on to the next section of what I'd like to talk about, if it's okay. This has been great. So now part of this is, what's the market? So I want to talk a little bit about how you figure out what the market is, right? And so the first thing that is a gating principle, pardon that for like a fancy concept, it's a gating principle or an inflection point, is your product or service a need or a want? And by the way, that's not wrong. If what you're doing and want to do is a want, that's okay, right? Facebook is a want, not a need. Although some people might say they need it, the fact is it's a want. You need to get your hair cut, but you don't need to get it fancy. You just need it cut, otherwise it's in your face, right? And so that's the difference between need and want. And so you want to think really, really hard. Thank you. Yes, we need to eat. So my point is that it's important when you're thinking about the market to understand, am I selling a need or am I selling a want? Because it is important to understand the difference. The next one is, you want to be able to clearly articulate what the problem you're trying to solve is. What's the problem you're trying to solve? And that's how you figure out what your market is. What's the problem? Facebook started, with Mark Zuckerberg wanting to get dates. That was the problem that he wanted to solve. It didn't end up to be that, but that really was the problem he was solving. Any business you look at is a problem that was being solved. Google started by solving a simple problem, which is people wanted to be able to search for all the various websites that are on the internet. That was it. It wasn't Google. It wasn't Gmail. That wasn't what they started with. They just started with that initial problem. And so be crisp. That's a word I use a lot. Be crisp about what problem you're trying to solve. And then once you understand a problem, then you want to articulate and figure out what's the opportunity, right? Where is the opportunity for that problem to be solved? And that's the who, right? So there's a universal problem, like, let's say hair, right? Well, where's the opportunity? Well, do you want to cut everybody's hair, or do you want to cut only women or only men, right? Now, in today's world, we don't say specifically only women or only men, because now I'm sensitized to the fact that gender identification isn't necessarily binary. And so if I wanted to go into cutting hair, maybe I don't even say women or men, right? Maybe the problem is that there aren't enough people who cut hair that do it in a relatively androgynous way. And that's your opportunity, you see? So any questions about those concepts? They're all related. Problem definition, need versus want, and where are the opportunities? Okay, so now I want to tell you a story about opportunities. I grew up in Springfield, New Jersey. You can look it up on a map. And right across Springfield, New Jersey is this road called Route 22. Route 22, when I was growing up, and probably still the case, was the 10 worst stretches of highway in the United States. That's how bad it was. It was like bumper cars. It was just 2 lanes, 3 lanes in either direction. There was a median in between with shops. So you had shops on one side, 3 lanes of traffic, traffic light every couple of miles. Then there was shops in between and shops on the other side. And in order to get to the shops, you'd have to go U-turns, and it was like bumper cars. And for many years, there was this restaurant that was in this one location. It was there for I don't know how long, and maybe the family retired. And then every year thereafter, it became a hot dog stand, then a pizzeria, then a Chinese restaurant, then a Mexican place, then a Japanese place, then a salad place. Every year it changed. And I always wanted to know the answer to the question. You're the 8th person, the 9th person to go into that restaurant and ask yourself, what are you doing different that the prior 7 failures didn't do? That's a definition of what's the opportunity, right? I think the market has spoken that is not a good place for a restaurant because 9 people failed at doing it. You're the 9th, you're the 10th. Ask yourself, is there really an opportunity for me? So be thoughtful here. The other thing to talk about when you're talking about a problem definition is in business, you're often either helping a company or a person make money, or you're helping them spend less money. So the idea is top line or bottom line. So if you're selling something to other businesses, you're either helping them make more money. So for example, you're selling them advertising services. Well, advertising services helps other companies make more money by reaching more people. Or you could be selling them a more efficient accounting system, which then helps them save money. You see? So you're either helping with a top line or you're lowering a bottom line. Yes, they didn't do their homework. Thank you. So, right? So you want to think about, am I a efficiency thing or am I a success thing? In the prison work we used to do, we used to talk about it as maximizing return or minimizing regret. It works in life, in other words. Maximizing return, more fun. Minimizing regret is safety. I didn't die.
Did you die?
The next thing I want to say is you're going to be selling. So the question is, who are you selling to? This is one of the most important things you can do when you're talking about the market. It may not sound, Rick's like talking about things like doesn't sound like marketing to me. This is absolutely critical. It is, if you're going to be selling, you're always selling something. You need to be very clear. This is my empathy thing, is who are you selling to? Meaning what's motivating them? In other words, you could have a maximizing return product or service, but you're selling it to people who are bottom line focused. You now have a mismatch. You see my point? So you really need to understand this arbitrage, right? This buyers and sellers, right? If you're a seller, you got to understand your buyer. And if there's a mismatch between the two, the parties never meet, transaction doesn't occur. So I'm throwing a lot of stuff out there. I'm going to pause right now. How are we doing on market? I'm not confusing you. We're good?
So what do you do if you have a, if you're selling them something and they have a bottom line approach? What do you do? I mean, do you?
Well, you might not have the right product for that buyer, correct?
Oh, for that particular buyer, I got you.
Yeah, okay. That's right. What I'm saying, remember, Andrea, we're at the top of the funnel now. So we're
Okay.
we can. There are problems that can be solved tactically once you have a product, you have a service, you have a market, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to help you ideate, right,
Gotcha.
top of the funnel to try to understand. Well, what is my market? Right. The other thing that you can use, I like being personal, right? And so I am not like a fancy pants. I don't need to. I'm not really a top line person. I'm lunch pay. I know this about me. I'm blue collar. I grew up lower middle class, right? My house had one bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I grew up, and so I tend to be very pedestrian, right? I tend to like to operate in the more literal meat and potatoes, lunch pail type businesses. It's just who I am. It's where I'm most comfortable, right? Doesn't mean I'm better. It just means that I know this about me. And so to your point, Andrea, you may feel more comfortable. And that's what I'm trying to help y'all do. I'm trying to help you think about, who are you? What is the business I aspire to have, right? Maybe you are a real capitalist, And so you want to have a maximized return type business, right? Because I'm a capitalist. I believe in making money. That's great. I support that. So part of this is about personalities here, as well as anything else. Does that help you, Andrea?
Yeah, I think you just move on to the next potential customer, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, but maybe you'll have this voice in your head, and you're talking to somebody, and you guys are going like this, like you're not understanding each other. You might come back to, oh, right, I'm a bottom line product, and they're a top line thinker. So you either adjust to them or bail.
Gotcha.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's how you operationalize what I'm saying.
Quick question.
Hey, Rick.
Sorry.
Yeah.
There's a couple of questions about explaining to the group here tonight. When you talk about top of the funnel, everybody may not understand what that means.
Perfect. Thank you, Tom. Funnel. I use the concept of a funnel a lot in business concepts. So tonight, I'm just going to explain generally what I mean by a concept. I'm not right here, but this is what Rick Genzer, means, which is when you're at the top of a funnel, it means that you have a wide space with lots of options. And as you work down the funnel, it narrows down and narrows down, and your options become more and more narrow. And then out the bottom of the funnel is an answer, or the most focused part. So for example, if you were at the top of the funnel, looking for a significant other,
I got you.
I'm talking to as many people as I can on all the electronic dating apps.
Awesome.
And at the bottom of the funnel is a relationship. And there are steps in between, like the next step might be first dates with a few people. And then you might have second dates with a few people, and so on until you've settled on something and somebody has settled on you. So that's what a funnel means. And it's a process that I use in business quite a bit. And it's about decision making. It's about a lot of things. So right now, we are kind of at the top of the funnel of this OnRamp program, but we're in the middle of the funnel in my talk. Because by the time I get to the end of my talk, I hope that we have 2 or 3 concepts that you all walk away from. So we're middle of the funnel now.
I just have a question based on something you said earlier regarding what makes you different than the 7 businesses that failed before you. So when you're in a pitch competition or you're speaking with investors, anybody like that, let's say your product is relatively new to the market and there are either very, very few previous examples of yours, or if not, maybe you can't find any information on somebody who's done something like yours, like your product. How do you answer this question? Because I feel like it sounds like a cop-out to say like, oh, we're brand new, we don't have any competitors that failed before us, so that's why we'll be good. So how do you answer that?
I love this question. So you need to study a little bit about economic theory, honestly, to do a great job here. Michael Porter does a good job in understanding this idea. There's a book called Blue Ocean Strategy, which talks a little bit about competition. But I want to tell you a practical answer to this question. If you ever say to a potential investor or a pitch competition that there is no competition, you're going to be rejected. And the reason for that is there's always competition. You're always competing against do nothing. You're always competing against stone tablet and blood. You know what I'm saying? You're always competing against a stupid solution. So bear that in mind. The second thing I want you to know is that if you don't have a history, I realize that this relates to domain expertise as well. If you don't have a history, or the product life cycle might be early on, I want you to think about the story matters. In other words, how you got here matters. And being able to explain that story arc actually can be quite compelling. So for example, there's a great, very inspirational person here in Philly that had catastrophic brain injury and couldn't remember anything. And he developed a piece of software that helped him remember. Could you imagine developing software to help you remember? I don't even know how you do that, right? Because you'd have to keep track of the features. I mean, very impressive individual. But it really doesn't exist. This kind of software doesn't really exist. But he did talk about what he was competing with, which would be talking into a voice recorder, for example. A very, very pedestrian, simple way to do that. And so the next thing I want to say, and then I'm going to shut up to answer your question, is this idea. I like philosophy a lot. And the way I interpret philosophy is the following. The answer is not as important. In fact, the answer doesn't really matter as much as the way you got to your answer.
Mhm.
So we as investors know that everything you're going to tell me about the future is going to be wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. I know it. By the way, any investor that thinks they know the future or thinks you know the answer to the future, they're miserable. I'm sorry. It doesn't make any sense. So if I know you're going to be wrong, well, how do I judge? Well, the way I judge is, well, what rationale did you use to say I'm going to be $1 million company in 2 years? Or what rationale did I use to decide that we're better than something, even though I haven't made the thing yet? It's what criteria, what rationale did you have to draw the conclusion that you made? The conclusion, I don't care about. I only care about your argument. Does that help?
Absolutely. That was extremely helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay. Tom and Angela, it's 25 after. I have one more area of content, which probably is another 10 or 15 minutes. So my guess would be I can wrap this up in less than 20 minutes. Is that about right?
That's about right. And
Okay.
you're doing phenomenal. And
Okay.
also too, Rick, just to respond back to the last gentleman's question where you did a very good job. One of the things I think people need to understand about takeaway tonight that you said is a very critical information. It's being able to tell a story. That is what's powerful, and that's what attracts investment. Being able to tell a story about why you do what you do and you're able to articulate what it means in terms of the market is a very powerful message. Those are the things that, as you know, we talked and you mentioned, that resonate with us as investors, that we look for in terms of the opportunity. Because 9 times out of 10, what we're predicting or potentially being told about the upside, as you pointed out, is going to be wrong. Not necessarily it's going to be bad, but it's not going to be as accurate as we think it is. But the question becomes, are you the person that's going to be able to get us there and adapt and adjust to the changing conditions that the opportunity is being positioned for? And so you being able to tell a story is so critical, because that gives us an understanding of your ability to be able to sense what's going on and provide a direction and in a position about how to get there when things do change.
Okay. The next thing, I want to use just some really kind of B school terms for this market area, so you can research some of these things. Well, the first one you want to know is the market segmentation, right? You can't, an investor term in this area is called boiling the ocean. You don't have a product that everybody in the whole world is going to want to use. It's just, that's boiling the ocean. It's not going to happen. So what you need to do is you need to split it up. And there's all kinds of dimensions you can use for this, but I'll list a few of them and you can write them down, or you can write me an email later on. But there's geography, right? What part of the world do you want? What part of the country? What part of Philly?
Mhm.
You want to have, what kind of companies are you selling to if it's a business to business thing? If it's not business to business, then what kind of person? What's the demographic of the person you're trying to reach? What sector are you in, or what sector are you targeting? So, are you in materials science or digital health or life sciences or whatever? There's sectors there. if you're selling to other businesses, then you're talking about what stage, right? You might sell to early stage companies versus Fortune 50 companies. So the idea here, I don't only listen to a few, by the way, there's hundreds of these segmentations. You could Google the concept of market segmentation and it would help you. But what I'm just trying to help you with or direct you to is you don't want to see an entire market. There's actually a lot of value in segmenting the market. And then taking it one step further is, it is okay to say that my product or service applies to 4 or 5 market segments. That's fine. But the next thing you have to be clear about as a market is how you're going to enter the market. So think about it as you have a road, and the road starts off maybe as a dirt road, and therefore you just kind of hop on the dirt road. But as your product and you become more sophisticated, the road gets wider, there's more lanes, and the on-ramp to the market is literally the entrances to that roadway. And so you could tell the story, to JB's point, you can tell the story that we're going to eventually be this huge company. We're going to sell to lots and lots of segments in lots and lots of markets and lots and lots of sectors, for example. But I'm going to articulate my way of entering the market. You're going to be crisp about that area. My second use of the word crisp. Very, very clear and literal about how you're going to enter the market. We want to hear about the whole market, that's true, but you also want to be clear about how you're going to enter the market. Start small and grow from there. Yeah, thank you for noticing. I'm looking at my notes here. If you want to do something that talks about how you compare in a market, you can research SWOT. That's S as in strength, W as in weakness, O is an opportunity, and T is in threat. It's a SWOT analysis. And by the way, if you want to use Google to its full extent, you could type SWOT and you can space and you can say VS, and then it'll give you a whole bunch of alternatives to how to do different analyses like a SWOT analysis. But that's how you figure out the market in your business. You could do a SWOT analysis. I'm about to move on unless y'all push me or keep me here. I want to leave room for questions too.
I guess this is a nitpick. I have a nitpicky question, I guess.
Is this Ben?
Yes, this is Ben. Going back to JB's point, like if you say, look, this is my segment and nobody in my segment is doing what I'm doing, and you kind of build on the fact that you've done a lot of research on the segment, is that something that investors would like to hear, or would they still get turned off by saying nobody else is doing this?
No, I'll buy that for $1, Ben. It's a good way to flip the script. Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. You know, one of the, I'll give you a literal example of that. I've licensed this patented technology that has been proven to work in segment A, and I'm applying it to segment B, and no one's doing it.
Or I have a cheaper method of doing it. I've got a smaller company. I can afford a price lower than they're in mid-market. I can go to lower tier markets.
Yeah, and you can say, we have competition if our price were bigger or a different segment, but for this particular segment, at this particular price point, this is how we compete.
So
it's a different way than saying there's, quote, no competition.
Fair, okay.
I know it sounds, might be nuanced.
I have a question.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Shakina. And I actually was a part of Rise Up Philly pitch competition. So they was the guys who referred me to y'all to be a part of this. So as the question was, I want to invest, I want to create something, a new brand for a feminine hygiene product. So even though there's many competitions out there, to get an investor or to see how I can create their product, something along the lines that he was saying, that I believe that I have a new way of offering that to women along those lines. Is that pretty much what y'all was saying? That I can say that I have a new way of doing it other than my other competitions?
Yes.
That I created a way of offering women what they need during that time, but it's done differently than the other competitions. They haven't thought of it the way that I have thought of it.
I'm going to give you 2 words to that point, and it's a perfect point.
All right.
You want to compare and contrast. Compare and contrast.
Got you.
Right? So comparison says, this is how we're similar. Feminine hygiene, right? That's the market segment. I'm comparing. Then I'm contrasting by saying, well, we use all natural ingredients and they don't. That's the contrast. Right? Compare and contrast.
Got you. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
No worries.
Hey, Rick?
Yeah.
Rick?
Hey, Michael.
Hi, I'm Michael. I've got a product I'm developing. I'm in customer discovery, and there's 2 main market segments that are becoming interesting. I'm getting the most traction, and the underlying technology is going to be very similar, almost identical for both of them, but they're definitely different segments. One, just different populations. So I know I can't give you all the details now and so on, but just in general, could you give thoughts about like an investor's perspective on how focused the need is on a single segment as you're getting started? Because I'm wary of giving up on either of them. And I know it, but I'm probably going to have to choose one for like the initial launch and where to put all the marketing effort at the beginning.
Yeah. So we investors often talk about this idea of product market fit. It's a phrase I hate, by the way, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say it. So there's this idea of product market fit. Michael, the way I would do what you're talking about is the following. The language that I would use to an investor would be the following. My thesis is that there are 2 good markets for this product. And my market entry position or strategy is the following. I am going to split my efforts towards these markets, and I'm going to focus on the following 4 criteria that I'm going to use to evaluate product market fit. And I will then choose one once I've reached critical mass or enough information to make that A/B decision. And if it turns out that both of them are viable, I'm going to go after both. That's the way I would do it. So what you're saying, you're not saying I am planning on doing both because we're worried you're boiling the ocean. So we're hearing you say, you know what? I'm going to test it. I'm going to see if my thesis makes sense.
Yeah.
And I'm going to use very specific criteria to determine what this is. The phrase, is this phrase number 4? If it's not worth measuring, it's not worth doing. If you're not measuring it, then don't talk about it.
Yeah, okay. No, yeah, that's helpful because I was thinking that I might have to make that decision sooner than what you're describing. So even sort of at like a seed funding round, it might be okay to say, I'm exploring these 2 segments and this is my plan for how to evaluate them, that kind of thing. That's what you're saying, right?
Yep. That's what I'm saying.
I'd like to quick something there, Michael.
Yeah.
You might just decide the first one is going to be easier to do. So I'm going to do that first. I have success, and that makes it easy for me to prove to investors that I have the chops, and then you can do the second. It's not like you prefer the first or the second. I would pick the easier one first to prove that you can do it and to make sure that you have the chops to do it, and then do the harder one.
I love that, Zay. Thank you.
Yeah, at this stage, I don't know which is easier or harder, but that's part of the whole process we're talking about, right?
Well, that's why I answered the way I did, Michael, because I felt like you were conflicted there, right? You had that parallel, but you definitely, Zay makes a great point. This idea of a quick win, right? And the other term to use here in business when it talks about entry is this notion of momentum, that you begin, your company literally builds momentum like a car going down a hill that doesn't have a motor, right? I'm not going to use a Boy Scout reference there because Um, we're going to talk about mechanisms now. Like, how do we accomplish some of this stuff, right? So Tom brought up a great point, which I now want to magnify in this section, which is the concept of an informational interview, doing your research and gathering data. People kind of like to talk. And if you invite them to talk, you'd be surprised how willing they are to talk. So if you want to learn more about some industry, you could find some industry leader, tell them you're researching the industry, and ask if they're willing to spend 30 minutes and answer your questions. You'd be surprised at how often somebody says yes. It shocks me. The key here, and I can't stress this enough, because I didn't really talk about it much at the beginning, but I'm going to bring it up now. And that is, I have a very strong moral compass. It's not religious. I'm actually not, I have almost no religiosity in my life, but I believe in integrity, right? And so I operate with candor in my life. So if I'm going to ask somebody for an informational interview, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to begin my relationship with them by telling them something that's not true. So I can't stress this enough. If you want to go out in the world and you want to start doing some first position interviews and discussions, I think it's important, at least to me, to be candid. Hey, I'm thinking about starting a business and I potentially might compete with you. Would you mind doing an informational interview? If that's the truth, you don't want to be caught in that lie later on. Okay? So just a thing. The next thing is to study history. Like I told the story about the restaurant. I think somebody, put it in the chat. They were like, well, they obviously didn't study history. Well, study history, right? If you want to build a product, study iPod. That's a fascinating history. The iPod came about with at least 4 generations of roadkill before it. Like, that product actually came out and there was a lot of digital music players that had already failed. So why did they succeed? You study history and you find out why. And if you want, I'll tell you why I think they succeeded. But that's studying history. Google came out with a search thing, right? Alta Vista was like a huge thing. They were a dominant player. Google did their research. They did their history lesson. And they realized, no, they don't have it right. You got to do your research here. You want to understand why these things succeeded and why they failed. If you want to learn anything about how consumers react, study the VHS versus Betamax market. Like, how did that happen? How did a clearly inferior product become dominant? Right? VHS was junk compared to the Sony Betamax system. Why did that happen? It turns out, by the way, here's a little cheat sheet. Turns out the reason why VHS won is the same similar reason why the iPod was able to succeed. I love that phrase. Okay, so what I want to talk about is how you gather information. So as a time check, I'm going to try to wrap this up in less than 5 minutes because I want to leave room for interactivity. Is that fair, Tom?
Yep.
You think we're about right? So I'm going to tell you one story about gathering data. I have a company in my portfolio. I'm happy to report they're in my portfolio now. It's called Genzer, and they sell shoes to young mothers that have young kids. And how did they figure out whether this was a good market? They visited playgrounds in Philly and they talked to mothers. They just visited playgrounds. They weren't really sure they would be in the shoe business. In fact, I'm not even sure they were in the shoe business when they started talking to young moms. I think they literally just went there and say, what's your problem? They literally did that kind of research. This kind of research is possible. Do your homework, study history, talk to people, do anything that you can do. It turns out that there are electronic means that are at your disposal. It shocks me how few people use them. So the Philadelphia Public Library, if you have a library card, you can go to a library or use their online resources and use those databases. You don't always have to use Google. In fact, the dark web, as they call it, the web that is behind, usernames and passwords, that's where some really good data exists. So don't assume you're getting your best data with a Google search. Use the public library. If you have a degree from a university or even a high school would be my guess, they have electronic libraries that give you access. Use that, use those cards and do your research that way. And pre-pandemic, I used to love talking to reference librarians. They're unbelievable, man. It's just crazy how much they know. And you don't realize how approachable they are. You can just go to the Free Library of Philadelphia, talk to the reference librarian and say, I want to find out what the market is for blah, 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 blah. Where do I start? And they'll be able to help you. It's pretty cool. These people have graduate degrees on finding stuff. The last thing is I'd like to bring up, and then I'm gonna wrap it up, which is this idea of mechanical Turk, Turk. You can Google it. You can actually pay people a really small amount of money, like 5 cents, to complete something for you. It's amazing. So you can have an army of people out there who will do something for you. And you can have them do all kinds of things, like answer a survey question. I have a person that has educated me about it. He uses Turk to have people comb through websites and give a name, address for business owners in certain areas. They just comb through web listings, and he pays 25 cents a name. And he gets hundreds of names. Super cheap. Turk. There it is. Thank you. So I'm going to wrap it up with some key points. Number one, don't be afraid to be wrong. You're going to be wrong. So you're going to start with some thesis. You're going to start with some theories, and those theories are going to be wrong. Don't be afraid of it. Embrace it. Lean in. The beautiful thing about being me is I'm wrong a lot, so I'm really used to it. So get used to being wrong. And by the way, you think that's shtick? It's not. I'm used to being wrong because I'm wrong a lot. I have 2 daughters, and they remind me how wrong I am all the time. The other thing about being wrong,
Rick, you're muted. We can't hear you.
somebody muted me. That's all good. The corollary to being wrong is to be open to new thoughts. So in other words, you go in with a theory, I think this should be blue, and then you do all this research, and the research says, well, blue's okay, so you're not wrong, but green is more right. So you need to be open to new thoughts. And know that almost all startups have a couple of pivots before they actually hit their stride. So whatever you thought you were going to do, you're probably going to take a right turn and then a left turn. Be open to that. It takes a lot of work to do this. And you want to find your experts wherever you can. So I'm gonna end with the following story, and then I'm gonna shut up. There's this guy, Pat Riley. He was the coach of the LA Lakers. The LA Lakers had a run under Pat Riley. It was unbelievable. And he won a championship on some freak play. Like it was the game, it wasn't game 7. It was, he won, it was like kind of a freaky play. And the interviewer asked Pat Riley, don't you think, you had luck, and, luck brought you this championship? And Pat Riley said, well, let me tell you about luck. He goes, what we do is we work really hard so that when luck comes our way, we're there to take advantage of it. Now, he didn't coined that phrase. I know he's like a Buddhist type guy and it comes from something else, but I think it's really evocative. And I think I want to leave you with that thought that it's going to take a little bit of luck for you all to be successful. There's no doubt, but I just believe in hard work from my blue collar background. So the thought here is the following: work your butt off to put yourself in a good position. So when some market conditions or some kind of luck comes your way, you're there to take advantage of it. That's my closing thought. Questions for me?
Rick, outstanding job. Can everybody, let's go to reactions and just say, give Rick a big hand, everybody, for his workshop tonight. Fabulous job, Rick. We definitely appreciate the wisdom you dropped on us, the real information you shared about the journey, things you should be considered, things that should be considered, how you should look at success. Begin, with the end in mind, understanding inputs, domain expertise, needs versus wants, being crisp. These are all invaluable insights you shared with us tonight. For the next 5 minutes, are there any burning questions while we have Rick here with us before we wrap up?
And let me also say this, yes, you can find me, right? Rick Genzer, I exist. You Rick Genzer me on the internet, you're gonna find me. By all means, write me an email, right? The worst thing that happens is I'm too busy to answer something like that, but I will respond. So this is not the last time. Well, put it this way, it's the last time if you make no effort, right? I'm not going to find you, but if you find me, who knows? So.
Yeah, I believe, Angela, yeah, you put Ben Franklin. There you go. He's in it. Ben Franklin and Rick is in the chat, everyone. So opportunity while we still have Rick with us before we close out, everyone. Any great questions tonight? Any more questions for him?
May I ask a quick question?
Please.
Hi, Rick. This is Shelly. Quick question.
Hi,
how did you get into your first ever entrepreneurial endeavor?
Totally accidental. And one day, there isn't enough time for me to tell you my first job story, but it literally was an accident. I went to interview for this job, whatever it was, testing, and somebody found out that I wrote software for a couple of months. And so the company was hiring so many people, the VP found out that there was somebody there and they pulled me out of one interview and I went into another interview and I ended up writing software. Totally by accident. And a lot of my career is accidental. By the way, another job I got, I literally stole something. Not permanently, I relocated it temporarily at a trade show. And I ended up getting a job because somebody thought that was a really clever thing that I did. So I'm a nutcase.
Rick, what's been one of your most interesting and different type of investments that you guys have made at Ben Franklin that you made that you thought might not succeed, but you did anyway, since Ben Franklin is not totally driven by ROI?
I think that, wow, can I think of an investment that was shocking to me? Yeah, well, I can say it like, I'm going to say it in a more general way. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I had a portfolio. Remember, I have 45 companies in my portfolio. 5 of my companies are in restaurant technology. Think about what was going on in my head in March 2020. I had 10% of my portfolio was in restaurant technology. Wouldn't you know, Tom, that every single one of those companies is not only surviving, but they're doing really well. So the most shocking thing about what I do is that that's an outcome that's possible. 5 companies in restaurant tech are doing better now than they ever would. In fact, one of them is going to get a huge exit because they helped restaurants be in e-commerce and they have a cookie cutter way to do it, and their business crushed it. They're worth today 2.5 times what somebody offered them for the business 14 months ago. 2.5x times. Because the pandemic had them do better. So that really isn't an answer to your question, but it shocks me.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of response I was looking for.
Okay.
One of the things that, what we want to take away from these workshops and the opportunities to be introduced to people like yourselves in the startup world is that, as you pointed out earlier, we can never predict the future. But what you can do is work towards your own success and put the time in, and you'll be surprised how the opportunities can pivot your way. Because as you said, startups, and I've seen it multiple times, you're going to pivot 3 or 4 times, in your entrepreneur journey. The question is just getting started and working at it.
2 things to say to that. Number one, read Zave's comment. I agree with what he said. The second thing I'd like to say is this is about creating your own future, right? And I mentioned earlier that I don't have a lot of religiosity in my life. Now I'm going to tell you why. The reason why I don't judge anybody, but the reason why I don't have a lot of religiosity is because I feel that I am a product of all the decisions that I make. In other words, I don't feel that there is something else that's helping me. I don't think it's wrong. I'm just saying that I want to believe that I am the product of the decisions that I make. So I'm creating my own future. And that's the way I like to think about being an entrepreneur at the very least, right? That being an entrepreneur is about creating your future. It's about taking a more active role. When you're an employee to somebody else, you've given up some of that control. And some of us don't like that control. I know I don't like to be controlled. But when it comes to religion, I don't mean this. I'm not making any judgments towards anybody else. It's just how I feel about my situations.
Well, if there isn't any more questions, you pointed out Zave's comments that he made in the chat. Zave, did you want to add to that?
He said no.
And very important. Yeah. No one needs to listen to me pontificate.
All right, with everyone. So in wrapping up tonight's session, we want to thank you, everyone, for, first of all, coming to our first OnRamp session. I hope you found it as rewarding as I did. As someone that's been on this journey, there's always a nugget I can take away. And I definitely took a nugget away from Rick, even though he's someone that I've just met, but I'm very familiar with his organization and Ben Franklin and a number of his associates there. So Rick, on behalf of OnRamp, the Science Center and Venture Cafe, we want to thank you for coming in and offering a stimulating conversation that was very interactive, very informative, and very inspiring.
It was a pleasure meeting you guys.
And as Rick pointed out to everyone, please keep in touch with him. The information is there. One of the value for this OnRamp program is that we are looking to really figure out how to strengthen Philadelphia's ecosystem for startups. So going back to tonight's poll question, true or false, the region has a common destination for startups to go and connect for support. 71% of you said it's true, 29% of you said it's false. Okay, interesting facts. We'd like to thank you for that. And as we get ready for next week's workshop is going to be moving right into product development and take you down the path of understanding how to build your MVP. The facilitator next week has 10 years of experience developing products for Google, and she'll be able to share with you some insights as you understand how to prepare and go to market in terms of building something that customers will be able to find valuable in terms of demonstrating capability and capacity, and also to have you also to create something that you can actually pitch for investment. So at this point in time, Angela, did you want to add anything before we hand it over to Aaron and Eamon?
I just want to say thank you, Rick. That was amazing. We love your presentation and thank you so much for coming. And thank you to all of our participants for coming as well. And Tom, thank you for organizing all of this.
It's my pleasure. Okay, at this point in time, if not, we got 2 minutes to spare. Any questions for OnRamp or myself before we hand it over to the startup roundtable?
I think you're one of the best kept secrets in the area.
Because I'm nobody, Andrea, that's why. I appreciate those comments, though. I really do. Thank you.
So Rick, I was surprised to also hear that this was your first virtual presentation. And I was saying to some other folks offline, you did it all without slides. So that was really impressive. So thank you.
I think we've seen enough slides. It's just my way. I've been on panels and I've been in many, I meant, content delivery, Tracy, but yeah, I hope I was useful.
Great.